So thanks everyone for joining us for this session. We are TeachFirst, and hopefully you're expecting us to talk to you about what's on the screen at the moment. So undertaking a CRM transformation to improve data quality and insights, which is a lot of words for a title. So my name is Jonathan. I'm the head of data and performance here at TeachFirst, and I'll let my colleague introduce himself.
Hi, good morning. My name is John Meadows. I'm a senior reporting analyst at TeachFirst.
And I think this is, thanks, John. I think this is down in the program as a panel discussion, but I'll level with you. It's just the two of us, so we'll make that feel as much like a panel as we possibly can. I think the thing I'd really want to highlight right at the beginning is that we're really keen to hear from you throughout this session. So I'll say a couple of things right at the start. Here's the session overview that you'll have seen, and this is the blurb, the wad of text that has encouraged you to come here to us today. And I've highlighted a few parts of it. So the first thing to say is that we are in the process of upgrading our customer relationship management system. We haven't finished it yet, and so we are not the experts on this. We've learned a lot already, but we have a lot more to learn. And so this is very much a session where we're going to share our experiences so far. But I think what would be great is absolutely to kind of hear from you about your experiences so far as well. Where are you at? Are you further along than us? Actually, are there things that you can help us with? We'll have some questions as we go along that are questions we haven't really answered yet. We might be some way to an answer, but we certainly haven't solved these problems. And we'll highlight where those questions are. And I think that in particular is where it'd be great to get kind of your thoughts in the sidebar. Do add them to the question and answer tab or the chat tab in the sidebar. And we can, there's two of us, so one of us will be reading that, and we can pick up particular questions, thoughts, comments. We'd love to hear your expertise as well. The next thing to say is it's the next bit that's highlighted in bold here is that we're focusing on data. So a business transformation is a huge beast and too much for us to cover in 40 minutes. So we're going to be talking predominantly about the data aspect of this work. And the third thing to say is that this is, kind of as I've already mentioned, TeachFirst's experience so far. So we do not present ourselves as necessarily an exemplar of this work. And in fact, I'd say we've made some mistakes ourselves already. But hopefully, our experience so far can be instructive for you and your own organizations. So with kind of all those caveats out of the way, what we're going to take you through is very quickly who we are, who TeachFirst are, where we are now as an organization in terms of our CRM, where we want to be, how we're trying to get there, and then, like I've said, kind of learnings and questions we still have. And kind of John and I will alternate kind of back and forth, kind of hopefully it will feel like a relatively informal discussion that we really encourage you to join in. So firstly, just very briefly, and apologies if you were in the TeachFirst session yesterday, you've already heard this, but who are TeachFirst? We're an education charity. And we are all about trying to support young people in schools to get a fair education. So we want to build a fair education for all and ensure that every young person, regardless of their backgrounds, is able to receive a good education and go on to succeed in life. We do this in three main ways. And if you've heard of us, you've probably heard of the first thing we do. So we train teachers. And so this is the top point here, great teachers. We recruit and train teachers to teach in disadvantaged schools and communities across the country. So you might well know us for that if you know us at all, but we do other things as well. We also train leaders in schools. So we believe that the journey to being a great teacher kind of continues throughout your career. And actually, once you've got through that initial teacher training, we want to train you to be a brilliant leader in your school. And leadership and teaching are the two most critical elements of a successful school. And so then it kind of, if you see these as like nested spheres of influence, you're like, we're supporting individual teachers, then we're supporting leadership teams, and then we want to support schools as entire entities as well. So we want schools across the country to thrive, and we do that by connecting schools, forming networks, and trying to influence a positive policy environment. So these are all things we do, and our mission is this: building a fair education for all young people. So just so you get a sense of us, we work with about 2,200 schools with an income of about 70 million, and we have about 790 staff. That's staff who actually work for TeachFirst, not our teachers in schools, but the actual people who work internally to our organization, for example, training those teachers. So that just gives you a bit of context as we go through kind of our experience. Okay. here's a slide with a lot of text on it. And I don't even expect you to read all this text, but I just want to say at the start that the most important thing, if you're going to go through a CRM transformation, is that you have a vision for it. And unfortunately, I mean, for data geeks like you and me, the vision might seem like it's just better data. But if you're going to sell this to the business, and if you're going to commit time and money and resource to this, you have to have a really clear link between what you're doing in terms of transforming processes and data and what the end outcomes are going to be. So here's a slide that kind of represents like our vision for the transformation work we're going through. So we think we need to undergo a business transformation of our data and of our processes, because it will help us serve our young people better. And that's ultimately what this all comes back to. And I'm sure you'll hear this kind of advice a lot over the course of these sessions, but when you're kind of maybe getting stuck in the weeds of individual parts of a project that's quite technical and quite complex, it always helps to take a step back and remind yourself why you're doing it. So as always, we start with the vision of why we're doing this. And we're doing this because we want to enable our staff to spend time working with young people, to have a greater impact with young people. And we want to ensure that our processes and data is efficient and effective so that we have a greater impact. Okay, in order to explain where we're going on this journey, we're going to start by telling you, I keep saying we're going to start, we're going to next tell you where we are right now. So John, do you think you could share some insights about our current situation?
Yeah, certainly. I went to some talks yesterday, and some of the colleagues on the call were talking, through a data maturity exercise and establishing where their organisations were sort of on the data maturity scale, if you like. And we did that exercise ourselves a couple of years ago. And actually, on the first doing of the first take of that, we TeachFirst considered ourselves to be quite data mature. We've been established since 2003. We've grown significantly in the last probably 5 years. We've developed a number of new programs. As Jonathan said, recruited a lot more internal staff, but we also, therefore, support much more teachers and a greater number of schools than we ever have before. And with that brings a lot of data. And we're at a position now where we've got more data than we ever have, and the greatest appetite for seeing, using all of the data together. The main issue or challenge that we faced, really, and perhaps we've realised this now in the last 12 months since really beginning properly the CRM transformation project that we're on, is that our current, it still is our current CRM system, but if we talk about our current or old CRM system, which is Salesforce, that was built for the initial stages of TeachFirst. And I say the initial stages really being from 2003, probably for the first 10 years to 2013. The main issues we've got with the current system that we have is it's really now not fit for purpose. It uses a lot of historical out-of-the-box objects, but then TeachFirst, as we've grown, have customized those objects, chopped and changed those objects, added and changed and deleted various fields. And we've got various instances now where it's very difficult to quickly or accurately report on what on the face of it is very simple and should be very quick data to access. So as we've got there, we've got an old mutant CRM database that has stopped growing now, only because we have put a freeze on things to stop it growing any further. And as I say, we've got really messy, long, convoluted processes that mean getting hold of data is a lot more inconsistent and slower, if you like, than it should be. What this means for insights and data, as I say, is one that can be complex and tricky to respond or generate insight to. There's an increased chance for inaccuracies, and it's a lot of manual effort and sort of administration time there as well. One thing that's worth saying as well is that, and I think this was highlighted in a lot of the talks that I went to yesterday, from a reporting perspective, TeachFirst have made significant strides in the last sort of 5 years. We've gone from a system of manual reporting in various Excel spreadsheets to automating reporting through Power BI and other systems. And as I say, really, we're at the stage now, and this is one of the main reasons for doing this project, where, as I've said, we've got much more data than we ever have, a lot more appetite for using and getting hold of that data. We just need to fix the processes and make things more streamlined and aligned going forward.
Great, thanks, John. So yeah, you know, we've touched there on kind of where we want to be, but this is kind of things that are critical as part of our transformation, right? And I guess this is the next layer down from the vision, is like, what are we actually trying to achieve? So probably the first most important thing for data is that we end up with effective data governance. We simply don't have an effective data governance structure in the organization at the moment, with very inconsistent usage of data, very inconsistent oversight of like when data goes into a system, how it gets cleaned, how it gets quality controlled. So we want to set up processes for effective data governance. Obviously, we're an education charity. The push is very much towards digital learning. When we started TeachFirst, that was not the case. So we need to reposition our data structures to have digital learning right at the core. As John's already touched on, this multi-program approach is critical to us now. When we started, we were one program. Now we're many programs. Those programs all operate in completely different ways. They all have different processes that are built on different data structures in our in Salesforce, our CRM platform. So we want to standardize them. We want to simplify them for the sake of engagement with those processes, so that our staff are capable of using them easily, but also so that we're capable of dragging good data insights out of them. Alongside that, we want a data warehouse. So we want to connect all of our data across all of our different systems into one place. And we want to carry data across from our old system to our new system. So we're not going to start again from scratch. We do want historical data in our new system. That requires quite a lot of thought, and we're going to talk about that in more detail. But this is kind of our vision for where our data needs to be, that it's not here at the moment. It needs to be connected. We need to not have random data sets sitting in spreadsheets on people's computers. We need to not have separate databases that are not connected to each other, because it makes it very difficult to draw insights from them and to report on kind of a holistic view of what's going on in our organization. And as John's kind of already touched upon, there's kind of an inherent lack of logic to the way our data and accessibility to the way our data is stored at the moment. So to kind of make this feel a bit more real, we're going to kind of take you through kind of like the actual data structures that we have and the data structures we're aiming for. Yeah, John, do you want to talk us through this?
Yeah, so our current data structure, or architecture, if you like, is very much very similar to the Weasley house in Harry Potter, if any of you have seen those films. As I touched upon before, it was built with the good intentions, the best intentions. It uses various objects in Salesforce, but as I say, those objects have grown as time has gone on. Various fields have been added on, just like the rooms and the structures of the Weasley house in Harry Potter. So we've got a current system that's big, it's messy, it's confusing. If you've worked with Salesforce before, you may think that it would be okay and it'd be easy to understand. But really, we're at a place now where we've chopped and changed our version of Salesforce that much that it's very much a customized version that we use internally. And it's very much not fit for purpose anymore for those reasons. And as I say, because we've grown so much in the last few years with the number of programs that we now deliver. So that's our CRM system. It's a web version of Salesforce that we use. We back the data up every day to a SQL, an SQL database. That is stored in two ways. Mainly pre-COVID, it was stored on-premise on our computer in our London office. But we've also had to adapt very quickly with COVID as well. And we now operate an identical backup, but in Microsoft Azure, a cloud-based storage platform as well. So again, we've got instances where we deliberately, in this case, if you like, creating inconsistencies or duplications, really just to patch things up. for the time being, if you like, and help us better identify the best way forward as well. Mainly as a COVID response, or accelerated through a COVID response, really. We've also got an additional database that houses our digital learning data as well, and that is also connected in the first iteration, if you like, of a data warehouse to our Salesforce backup of the SQL database. So really, we've got 3 or 4 systems or data structures, databases of our current architecture, as you can see there. And what we're trying to do is really streamline all of these together and improve the efficiencies, reduce the duplication, improve the automation, and the alignment of all of these going forward. So where we want to get to on the next slide is something a bit more aligned, a bit more streamlined. A new instance, if you like, of Salesforce. So we are still going to be using Salesforce as our CRM system, but what we're focusing a lot of resource and efforts on is a better version of Salesforce. So a version of Salesforce that uses more standardized objects and more standardized fields, so that we can employ and embed much more consistent and simplified data logging processes, so that if you transfer to our organization from an external company that uses Salesforce, you should be better able to pick up and use our current or our new version of Salesforce. So that's the one part of our target architecture, a new version of Salesforce. But then also we're trying to align underneath here on the screen what we then do with our additional data. So yes, we will still, mainly for historical and archival reporting, we will still create a backup of our CRM Salesforce database, but do so in a more streamlined and aligned way. We will also have our learning digital management database, which will continue to house and hold our digital data as well. But again, we're focusing our future efforts on aligning all of these into a cloud-based data warehouse, so that any future reporting that we do, regardless of where the data comes from, can be done so in a more streamlined and efficient manner. One thing is probably worth saying as well, and this is a question that we would welcome questions, thoughts, and answers in the sidebar, is one challenge we faced internally is our data team has had a lot of involvement and responsibility for a lot of this work. And I think sometimes we face challenges from our technology team, perhaps, in terms of where those responsibilities potentially overlap, or really defining those responsibilities from the data team to the technology team. And really, it's a question there that I'd welcome your thoughts in terms of whose responsibility should it be, or in your organization, if you've got database administration or similar database responsibilities there, in your organization, whose responsibility is that? Does it sit with your data team? Does it sit with your technology team? Or does it sit somewhere else, perhaps? Because that is one challenge that we faced, and I think we're still trying to really figure out the most sensible solution there.
Thanks, John. Okay, so we've kind of talked through what our current architecture is and what we're aiming for in order to streamline the way our data is stored and improve our insights. This is what the project actually looks like. So we're working with an implementation partner. Obviously, we're a fairly large, or at least medium-sized charity. So this is a big, complex project. So we've recruited what we're calling an implementation partner, who are kind of experts in this sort of thing, and they are working very closely with us. It's kind of their work is very much intertwined with the work of the business to deliver this project. And you can see here kind of an outline of the different work streams that we've got going on to make this project happen. And what I've done is I've just highlighted some of the key areas in terms of the data work. So the data team is leading, the data team that John and I sit in is leading the data preparation and migration work. So we're going to go into this in more detail, but that is kind of one work stream. But of course, there's kind of all this other work going on concurrently. We've got the program exec and the project management work streams that are overseeing the project as a whole and making sure it all fits together properly. In the top left, then, absolutely critical, we're redesigning our Salesforce. That's the central part of this project. So we are coming up with a new target data model with a data dictionary and an ERD, so an entity relationship diagram that kind of explains how all the data fits together. And then that is what we will use to work out how to map our data to the new systems. There's obviously also a technology work stream that's thinking about the actual platform. So, for example, where the data warehouse will be stored. And this is critical, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but there's an entire work stream about business change. So thinking about how we actually bring the business on this journey with us. And we've appointed what we call process and data owners across the charity. So people who are kind of doing their regular work, who are not directly involved in the project, but who are kind of linked to the project with this process and data hat on. And they're kind of like the subject matter experts, so the people who are really able to influence the design and really able to talk to the rest of the organization about what we're doing. This kind of gives you a sense of kind of the scale of what we're doing. And we're going to kind of dive down more into like the data aspect of this. Oh, if I can work out how to change slides. So it's really important to us as an organization that we retain some level of historical data. And from a data point of view, this is the hardest part about a transformation project, is that you've got to work out what data you still want in your future systems. And you cannot take all your data with you. Not only can you not take all your data with you, it would be foolish to take all your data with you, because this is a fantastic opportunity to clean your data and to work out what you actually need. So here's what our data migration process looks like. It starts with an audit of our data, which has been a massive process of literally pulling a spreadsheet of all of the objects and fields in Salesforce and going to the business and saying, what do you use these for? And working out what is useful and what is in use and what that use is. And in some cases, what we're discovering is that different parts of our organization use, for example, a field on Salesforce for different things. And we're also finding that the same information is stored in different places. So you need to kind of do this, like this rigorous review at the start to unearth kind of, if you like, all the problems you have with your current data. Then you need to undertake this mapping exercise, and that's what we're in the process of doing at the moment. So you've designed a new data model. What does your data need to look like in the future? And you're trying to work out, how do you map the data you currently have to your future data? So at the moment, we store the ethnicity of our program members in 3 different places for reasons that at this point surpass all understanding. So obviously, that's not what the new system will look like. We've got to work out how to map those 3 separate fields in our current system into 1 field in our future system. Once we've worked out that mapping, then we've got to go through an actual exercise of cleaning the data we have, because the data we have is not all accurate. It's not all high quality. It would be foolhardy in the extreme to just take a load of poor quality data into our new instance of Salesforce, because we will immediately end up with the same problems we had with our old system. And then there's this actual technical stuff. And honestly, this is why we've hired an implementation partner, because as a data team, this is not our expertise. But the kind of what's called ETL process is extract, transform, and load. How do you, technically speaking, get the data out of one system, transform it, so convert it into whatever you need it to look like in your new system, and then actually push it into your new system? So we're using Microsoft Azure clouds, a lot of their different products to do this, but you need people helping. And there I've got some key inputs. So you can't do this unless you've got the things on the screen that we're going to talk about if we've got time. So let me talk about some of this in more detail then. We're trying to be as practical as possible, by the way. I hope this is useful. I hope that this is interesting. I know some of it might be a bit dry and technical, but we're just trying to be as practical as possible. When you're cleaning your data, this is the stuff we've discovered so far. It's like we have 18 years worth of data sitting in our CRM database. and throughout much of that time, there were not strong processes in place for controlling the quality of that data. So we've got to think really carefully about what data we're going to try and take across. We know we need data. Well, in fact, let's start at the top of this pyramid then. The first question you might ask yourself is it necessary to take this data across? So what is the data you need? The contractual data, the legal data, the data you're duty bound to have. That's kind of a good place to start, because that you've got to find some way of getting across into your new systems. The next question, I think, is one we've really discovered in the last few months. Is it actually practical to get this data across? Some data, you might be sitting there as a data bod thinking, I'd love to have this data in the new system, but you're going to have to be a bit pragmatic about this. You cannot take all the data you want. We have a culture of people hoarding data, and part of this process is kind of a painful lesson in separation. You've got to learn to let go of some of your data and be really honest with yourself. Is it going to be worth the effort of trying to get this data from your old system into your new system? Or is it just going to take too much time to clean? Or is it going to be too hard to get into enough quality? Is it going to be too hard to make accurate? If you've got a load of incorrect addresses, are you actually going to phone up all of your stakeholders and ask for their addresses? And if not, are you really going to worry about taking across addresses from 20 years ago? It's that sort of thing. And that touches on this kind of, is it accurate? Don't migrate a load of poor quality data. It might be that there's some data you have to migrate because you need it and you're going to clean it later because you simply don't have time to clean it. But don't just as a blanket rule take across all the data with the expectation that you'll clean it at some point in the future. Because if you're not cleaning it now, you're not going to clean it in the future either. And all you'll have done is replicate all the data quality problems you had at the start of your brand new Salesforce. And then this last thing is kind of similar to what I've talked about, but is it actually valuable? Don't just carry across data for the sake of it. Use this as an opportunity to say, what data do we need? What data is actually important for us as an organization? And get rid of the rest. More data is not better data, right? We all know this. What else am I going to touch on? This is where it starts to become just a little bit us telling you slightly different things in no particular order. So,
Jonathan, can I just say, there's a lot of,
are there questions?
There are quite a few questions.
Yeah. Let's do some questions then, John. Do you want to?
I've been responding to a few where I could, but perhaps it might be worth just touching on a few of these.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll just read a few out. There's two. Dulcie, thank you for those. There's two that Dulcie have asked initially, so let's respond to those and then address a couple after this. So Dulcie's asking, do you have any recommendations for choosing an implementation partner? Jonathan, do you know the background or more detail as to why we chose PwC?
Yeah, I mean, so absolutely. Like we did, and this is probably worth saying, a huge amount of pre-work before we got to the stage of choosing an implementation partner, arguably years with a couple of aborted starts, but certainly months and months of requirements gathering with the business to understand the scale of what we were attempting. And then, you have your vision, you have your very clear outputs that you need, and you have a very detailed list of requirements. And then you go out to your implementation partner bidders and you say to them, you do know, well, this is what we did, an open tender process. Here's what is required in as much detail as you possibly can. And then we had a number of organizations bid, do presentations. We asked them to kind of demonstrate a particular area of the transformation. So we picked a part of the business that we're struggling with, our allocation model, how we allocate trainees to regions, and we said, you tell us what you think we should do here, and we got them to present that back to us. So we kind of went through, so we did a lot of detailed requirements gathering right at the start. And so I think to one of Dulcie's other questions about like the scale of the work, it's important that you have a sense of the scale before you get to that process of going out for implementation partners. In terms of the scale of ours, it's going to take us about a year, and it's there's probably about 20 people working on it internally at various stages of, not all full-time, but lots of people, at least 50% of their time is spent on this. One thing we're finding is it's really valuable to have people who know the business working on the project rather than hiring a completely different set of people to do this project. It's much better, that's what we're finding, if you have people who are kind of part on the project, but experts in the business. And so, yeah, that's hopefully helpful. John, did you want to add anything?
No, not to that. Thank you. Becky, I'm just going to pick up on your question. Thank you. Is there anything you would have changed sooner if it was possible? In other words, if your organization was smaller or younger? I think coming at this from a data perspective, a data logging perspective, we've spent a considerable amount of time in the last sort of 12 to 18 months as we've grown in the number of programs that we offer, and therefore the amount of data that we hold and log. We've spent a lot of time in the last 12 months really aligning how that data is logged in Salesforce. Now, that might sound quite a straightforward, simple process, and there's probably a fair question to answer in terms of, well, what's the need for that? Because surely that should have just been logged in the right way to start with. But I think, it just hasn't. It hasn't really. And what we've done in the last 12 months is really align that data logging. So what we now have is in our current system a streamlined and aligned, really accurate set of data. So the hope there is that this next stage of data cleaning and therefore data migration will be a lot easier and less sort of resource intensive than perhaps it may have been had this streamline of data logging not taken place. So for me, from a data logging perspective, that is one thing that I would say there as well. I think it's worth saying as well that Jonathan mentioned we've had sort of a couple of false starts on this transformation project as a whole. I think that the project itself, the concept of it initially began, I would say, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, but it's really only been in the last sort of 12 to 18 months where we've really sort of established the work and really got the work going. So I think there are learnings there as well in terms of getting it right initially for first time, if you like.
So what I might just do, so we've got like 6 minutes. I'm just going to very quickly show you the last few slides we've got, and then if there's any kind of specific questions about anything that comes up, we can focus in on that, or otherwise we can just focus on the last slide, which is kind of our lessons learned, if that sounds okay to everyone. We've got our email addresses at the end as well, so if there's kind of burning questions you've got, please do ask us. So important to have a data retention strategy. We've never had one as an organization. That's obviously a problem from a legal point of view, but it's also massively a problem from a data quality point of view. So part of what we're doing at the moment is coming up with a really clear data retention strategy, which includes, so you've got to think about where you're going to archive your data, anonymization of data if you need it for historical reporting purposes longer than you can keep it for legal purposes, for example. And then when you're going to delete it, make sure you have a plan for actually deleting your data. So I won't dwell on this slide, but really important to have a data retention strategy. We're still working on ours. One thing that's really helped us as a data team is to think about this as a life cycle, right? So here's your whole, every organization needs a clear data life cycle defined. This is the one we're working on. And then you can think about your data in each stage of the life cycle and what are the questions that come up as a result. So I've got in orange there some of the key questions that we've kind of got to think about as part of the data life cycle. But really this slide is just about saying, if you have a framework for your data lifecycle, and you start with that, that generates a lot of the things that you need to think about. So this is kind of a process we're going through about thinking about all this. Lots of questions here. Data insights, so really clear. John, I don't know if you want to touch on this, in fact.
Yeah, as we touched upon at the start, really, one of the main objectives for this whole project is to generate better and more accurate data insights, and they're going to be generated through more streamlined and simplified processes going forward. So we've talked through the data sources. One thing I've touched upon but not spent much detail on is the tools. We largely use Power BI to produce internal dashboards to report our data from those data sources, and the audience for those tools are both a mixture of internal and external audiences as well. So really this is the end goal of this project, is to generate better, more accurate, potentially quicker data insights from a more streamlined process as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, John. And so again, it's like, you've got to have a strategy, you've got to have a plan for your data insights. Like, what does it look like in the future? I guess that's what this is about. So I think like what we'll probably kind of finish on, and like I say, hopefully this has generated a lot of thoughts, but I realize there's a lot of content here for a relatively brief session. So probably hasn't answered all your questions, but hopefully it's got you thinking, and do kind of speak to us more about it. But here's kind of some of our really key learnings. Firstly, you've got to have a vision for data management from the start. You can't do all this really practical stuff unless you know where you're headed. So use this as an opportunity to really think about what you want data to look like in your new systems. If you don't do this, then in 2 years' time, you're just going to have all the same problems you've had. The actual structures, the databases, the tools are not going to themselves solve your data issues. You need to think about how you're going to embed the culture across the organization, have clear policies, structures, processes in place for data management. Build a really clear set of requirements before you start, as we said to one of the questions. Really have a sense of it, because these things can spiral massively out of control in terms of scope, in terms of cost, time, resource, if you don't have a really clear handle on what is important to you. And alongside that, be really clear about the benefits and the limitations. Like, what is the value of this to the organization? Why are you spending millions of pounds on this if that's what it's going to cost you? You're going to need to come back to that when it gets difficult and when you're trying to work out what to prioritize. And also be clear about the limitations. This will not be a silver bullet. There's a tendency to kind of think of these transformations as somehow in and of themselves revolutionizing your organization, and people start to talk about it as the solution to everything. It's not the solution to everything. You have to be really pragmatic about what a transformation can and cannot do for you, and you have to prioritize. You're not going to get everything you want from it. You're not going to have every single technological improvement you could think of. You've got to decide what's important to you as an organization. Bring the business with you is hopefully clear. This is hard, and I think there was a question about it, but I would say the key things here are have people dedicated to this. We've got a whole work stream dedicated to this, right? It's not an afterthought. This has got to be baked into everything you do. How do you work with the other people in your organization on it? How do you get them to see the benefits? How do you get them involved in the work? How do you ensure that the solution is a solution that is their solution and not a solution they're going to be unhappy with? I've said these all in the wrong order now, but I've also got up here, audit your data carefully. You can't transform your data unless you know where it is. And this is probably the most painful part of the process, right? You've got to understand where you are. Like I say, for us, that was spreadsheets of data, of our entire data dictionary, all the data we have on Salesforce, all the objects, all the fields, and getting the business to tell us what it is and what it's used for. John, anything to add?
No, I don't think so. Thank you. I think we've got 5 minutes left. As Jonathan said, our email addresses are on the presentation, or will be shared with you. There we go. Thank you. But perhaps let's just try and cover as many of the questions in the sidebar as we can. There's 2 questions around business processes in terms of how were we able to think through the business processes, particularly due to it can be time consuming or perhaps quite complex. So just picking up on Richard's specific question there, what I would say to that is we thought about this quite early on in the process. We employed somebody specifically to manage the business processes as a whole, and that person was responsible in the early stages for thinking through, for each program that we run, the individual processes and almost the customer journey of the programs there. That work has then sort of gone on to feed into the future design of the future CRM system, and it's that knowledge and work is sort of been used in other areas as well. So we were able to sort of act on that quite quickly. And I think sort of some of the benefits of that are starting to show in terms of the future design. So that's one thing I would say to that one there. There's a question. So let me scroll up. I'll just read it. Okay, do you think it's better to keep systems separate or build as you go? I think that's a great question, Kirsten. Thanks for that. I think really giving some reflections on how we're doing it currently is we currently have our current system. We've got a test platform for our new system, and we're almost using that test platform to build as we go. So in terms of building or rebuilding the current reporting tools that we have, we've got a plan in place to perhaps, if the timescales allow and go to plan, from September through to November, continue using that test system and how it's been built as it's going along, to use that to rebuild our reporting tools there. So how we're doing it is we're currently managing them both. And you're right, it does get quite messy and it is quite complex, but I don't think there's an ideal sort of solution in that case. We did initially explore using our current system, going live to our new system when the new system is in its final states, but we decided there were too many risks associated with that. So we'll use sort of a test environment that's building as we go through to hopefully manage that change a bit better.
John, just to say thank you for answering those questions. That's helpful. We're actually over by a couple of minutes, so I think we need to wrap up now to let you all go get a cup of something before the next session. But I really appreciate your time. As I've said in the sidebar, please do email us if we can be of any assistance. And I'm very keen to kind of hear your experiences as well. Yeah, thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of the festival.